Dr. Mo, it's an honor. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I want to get into, obviously we're going to talk about your experience in Gaza and the fight that you've launched to try to get a children's hospital into Gaza, which would be, extraordinary, I'm sure, for people on the ground. But I just wanted to start with, can you introduce yourself? What's your background? What brings you to this fight?
So, I'm a doctor from the UK. I'm a Palestinian refugee from Gaza. I was born in Mecca and I moved to the UK when I was 4 years old. I was educated in the UK, and for the last 8 years, I've been working and living in Australia. I'm a dual British and Australian citizen, but for a very, very long time, I was just a refugee. I was just a Palestinian refugee, I think up until about the age of 16 years old. Apart from obviously the medicine, I've played professional sports before. I've been played professional rugby, and I've competed a lot in sports. And I went to Gaza recently in 2024. And I also went again this year as well during this conflict. So I've been multiple times during this conflict, and the things that I saw over there, they really changed me to the core. The things that we had to experience, the children that we had to carry, and place dead children in their mother's arms. These things really had a fundamental change on me. And I think, you know, when I left Gaza, I was shocked at the lack of help that was coming the other way, that was coming to Gaza, and what actual plans and systems we had in place to combat the death and destruction in Gaza. And I've kind of been forced into this position to try and do something, to try and make something happen, to try and enact a change, because, as you know, governments have been completely ineffective. And even protest movements have been stalled and stifled. And I've just been
Yeah.
trying to look for a different way of how we can help the people in Gaza, and it's been it's been very challenging few months.
What's your family history? How did you, because your family's originally from Gaza. What is
Yes, yes.
give us a little bit of, how you end up born in Mecca as a Palestinian refugee.
So my dad was born in Gaza, and my mother is from the outskirts of Jerusalem, but she was born in Jordan. So they were both, we're from a village called the Salafir, which is between Jerusalem and Gaza. And my dad's family was ethnically cleansed in 1948, and they had to go to Gaza. As you know, 70% of the population in Gaza are refugees from what is
Hmm.
today Israel. So my dad was born and raised, and he grew up in Gaza, and my mother was born and raised in Jordan as a Palestinian refugee in Jordan. And my dad became a doctor despite all the odds, which was, at the time, we're talking about the 70s, the 80s. He went to a refugee school. My father didn't own a pair
Wow.
of shoes till he was 15 years old. And interestingly enough, the thing with the US aid, when Donald Trump cut the USA aid, my dad laughed and he said to me, that USA aid rice bags that they used to send around those food. He goes, I used to wear those as my trousers. His mother used to cut holes in them, and she used to put them on, and she used to sew them, and that's how we used to wear them. So, he's come from absolute abject poverty, and it's interesting the story of my mother because I got married in Gaza when I went to Gaza, right? That's a whole
I
different
saw I
story.
saw that. That's an
Yeah,
extraordinary story too. Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of parts of that I'd love to share with you, but the
Yeah.
interesting thing about my mum and dad was my dad, as a refugee, they went to Jordan, a lot of Palestinian refugees. So he eventually had to leave Gaza and he went to Jordan. And he used to walk to school barefoot through the desert to a place called Al Wahdat, which is a Palestinian refugee camp in Jordan. And my mum's family used to live there. Now, my dad, my mum's mum is from the same tribe as my dad. So whenever he would walk to school, he would, it'd be a long walk through the desert barefoot. He used to stop off at my mum's house. Now, at the time, he didn't know
Hmm.
my mum, but because he knew that, my mum's mum, she was somewhat from the family tribe, a distant relative. So he used to stop off there, and she used to give them water. She used to give him water to drink before
Wow.
school.
On the way to
And
school. Wow.
on the way to school, yeah, on the way to refugee school. So when my dad eventually became a doctor, which he was like the first person to become a doctor from his tribe, he'd overcome so many barriers and so many odds to be able to do that. When he went to Jordan, he wanted to obviously pay respects to my grandma, my mum's mum, because she always used to give him water. So he went one day to just go say hi to her, and just a respectful thing. And that's where he met my mum. That's where he saw my mum, and that's how they met, and it was because of my grandma giving him water when he was a kid.
That's a
And
beautiful story.
yeah, and it's a very Palestinian, story. They were just sticking together, that form of community. And it was interesting because when I met the woman that I married when I went to Gaza as a doctor, and I met this doctor there, we met at the Baptist hospital. And the Baptist hospital is where my father was treated as a kid. As a kid, he had a rock thrown on his head and he fell into a coma. And he went to the Baptist hospital and he was put in a medically induced coma at the Baptist hospital. So the Baptist hospital is what saved his life in Gaza. And I went there and I worked all those years later. I came back, and the first time I came back, I was working at the Baptist hospital where my dad's life was saved. And, it's kind of one of those full circle moments. Like I went there to the same hospital that saved my father's life. I went over there to help other people. And that's where I met my wife at the Baptist hospital. So, like, the healthcare system in Gaza, it, for me and my family, it's just there's like so many, and there's so many connections. And that's what I mean about, like, even if you're a Palestinian from the diaspora, the roots that we have in that home, in that place that we call home, which is Gaza and Palestine, it's so interconnected intergenerationally, you know?
Yeah.
And
I've been I've been amazed by I mean a lot of things. I've
yeah,
been amazed by the Palestinians that I've spoken to, people who had never left Gaza before, and
yeah,
they're speaking flawless English. I mean,
yeah,
better English than many native born speakers, quite frankly. The
yeah,
commitment to education, the commitment to the medical system. I mean, given that we know this obviously didn't start on October 7th, and the horrific conditions which were already imposed upon Gaza before that hand, what
yeah.
was able to be built, and these, the university system, the hospital systems, to me, it just seems absolutely extraordinary.
Well, that's honestly, that's the story of Palestine, of what it is to be Palestinian. My father is the leading fertility specialist in the UK. This is a man
Wow.
who used to study with candles because there wasn't electricity in the house for lights. He used to
Wow.
study under candlelight, and now he's the leading, fertility specialist in the whole UK.
Wow.
And the literacy rate in Gaza before this war was higher than in Israel.
Wow.
Education is so valued in Gaza, and this is what I mean. I look at someone like my father, and I think, like, he's given a chance, a small chance, a small window of opportunity, as a refugee in another Middle Eastern country, and that's not much better than what it is to live in Gaza or in Palestine in general. But even with that little bit of an opportunity, this is what he became, and I think part of the fear of allowing Palestinians to be free is there's this almost fear of how great can they be? How
Mm.
amazing can Palestinians be? What can they do for the world? You know? And I think that's the fear that the other side has, that um, we have unlocked our potential. You see the journalists in Gaza, you see the paramedics, you see the civil
Oh,
servants. What they
extraordinary.
do, yeah, what they do and what they've done, it inspires people all around the world. They look at it and they go that this is the if you were to think about what it means as a Hippocratic oath as a doctor, and you see these doctors in Gaza when Abu Sophia, who's now in Israeli captivity, they killed his son, they killed his
Mm.
family, and he still refused to leave the hospital. And then they took him away in that tank, and he was walking through the rubble. That iconic picture of him walking through rubble to be arrested in an Israeli tank. And I look at this as a Palestinian, and I just think to myself, like, these giants, these are giants, moral giants. These are, and they have inspired the world over
But
to.
Dr. Mo, I
Yeah,
think that of you too, because you decided to take time out of your life and put yourself at great risk. I mean, first of all, I can't even imagine being a doctor, let alone an ER doctor, period. I'm like the type that
mhm,
passes out at the sight of blood. It is not something I would ever be able to deal with. So
yeah,
even just to choose that profession, and then you choose to go to the most difficult circumstances that exist on the planet. And I know that obviously what people in Gaza are going through is, where we
yeah,
want to put the focus. But I also want to just applaud you for your humanity. I mean, you're a hero, right? In a moment when so many people are doing nothing, or they're enabling, or turning the other way, or providing cover for, you ran right in and said, "What can I do?" And you mentioned that this has changed you forever. I can't
Mhm.
even imagine the things that you've seen.
Do you know, look, the word hero is, I don't like, people to describe me as that, or to use that word, because it's such big shoes to fill. I'm only just doing what I have to do to help these people. I'm only doing what I have to do as a Palestinian. And when you go to Gaza, especially for someone like me, as a fluent Arabic speaker working in the emergency department, I'm not a surgeon. So I'm not up there in the operating theater where they bring you a dismembered, injured person to operate on. I'm right there in the thick of it when hundreds of bodies come in and there's body parts of children wrapped in blankets. There's mothers with plastic bags with body organs and parts that are just are liquid form, and there's women and children screaming, and then you have to step over children as they're bleeding out to death on the floor. You're getting, because there's no triage. People are grabbing your shoulder left, right. Please see my daughter, please see my mum. And you don't know which way to look and which way to go, and you're literally seeing all of these people on the floor. You have limited equipment, limited staff, and people are dying all around you, and you go over there to treat one person, and while you're treating somebody, other people are dying because you made that conscious decision to go treat that person and leave those people on the floor. And that's why, like, the word hero, I'm not a hero. I wish I could have done more. Sorry, man, I get emotional when I talk about that because I feel like I let them down when I went to Gaza. And that's why, like, I'm doing what I'm doing, because it's hard for me when those people that come into the ER look exactly like you. It's hard when those people share your surname as you. And yeah, it was a lot of difficult moments when we were there in Gaza.
I
And
can't imagine.
it affects me maybe a bit more because I'm just so tied to that place. Do you know?
Yeah.
Like, I look at the halls of that hospital when I was there at the Baptist hospital, and I was like, this is where my father was, as a child. This is
Do
where
you
he was
feel
in
a
a
harder
coma.
time? I know doctors develop an ability to sort of like shut that part of them off and do what they need to
Mm.
do. And I'm sure that even in the worst circumstances, you were able to keep it together because okay, these people need me first and foremost. I can have my emotions
Mhm.
later. But to did you find that harder to do in Gaza, given your deep connection there and just given the extent of the horror?
I mean, just because the level of what we were seeing, you know,
Yeah.
like, I didn't have time to be emotional. Sometimes when I'd go to my room, we would break down, at the things that we were seeing. But, like, I was just there constantly trying to work in the emergency department. And when I wasn't working in the emergency department, I was walking around in the wards to help the ward doctors. These patients that we'd seen 3, 4 days ago in the emergency department, they're still languishing in the wards with no medicine, no antibiotics, no painkillers. And, we're going around and we're putting in, because we've got a little bit of local anesthetic, and we're putting in blocks in people's legs, because their
Mm.
ankle is twisted the other way, and we still don't have the equipment to operate on them, and the surgical list is so long that you have someone with a broken leg in 3, 4 different places who's just got a splint on and no painkillers. And I'm sat there and I'm putting in femoral blocks here, I'm putting in a facial block here for someone who's got half their face blown off in the wards, and I'm just walking, and I just feel like, I'm like, is this all we've got? I've got this syringe of local anesthetic that I'm injecting into people's nerves to numb them just for a few hours, because that's all we've got. And it's people with the worst injuries that you can imagine, people with 60, 80% body burns. And you have kids with these kind of burns, and when we have to change their dressings, first of all, the
Ugh.
bandages that we use, because they're banned, they don't allow us to bring in proper wound care dressings, so we're using, like, your average bandage that you would use at home in a first aid kit to wrap a child with 80% body burns. So when you're changing the dressing, you're peeling off the skin from this child, and there's no painkillers, and they're screaming, they're grabbing your hand, they don't want you to do it. And you know that if you don't, they'll die because they'll get an infection. And even the antibiotics that we have for them are the wrong type of antibiotics, because all we've got is like 3 different types of antibiotics. Like, this is just the carnage that is Gaza, the horror that's been going on there for 2 years. And I'm there and I'm thinking to myself, like, this can't be it. Like, this can't be the what we call humanitarian aid to Gaza.
Yeah.
A doctor like me coming in, because look, I'm what we call a junior doctor. I'm a trainee doctor. I've got a lot of experience in going to these kind of places and stuff, but I'm still not board certified. And I know part of the reason why the Israelis would let somebody like me in is because they'll ban a specialist surgeon going in who's a
Really?
professor, because they don't want someone with those kind of skills. But they'll let someone like me in because they go, oh, he might not be able to do much. So we'll let
Mm.
him in. We let the emergency doctors in. We let general practitioners in, family doctors in, because when a child comes with 80% body burns, I might be able to stabilize that child and keep them alive for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. But they need surgery. And if they don't have that surgery, they'll die. And that's why they don't let the surgeons in. And that's why they might let someone like me in.
Unbelievable.
And I felt
Unbelievable.
that burden on my shoulders. I felt that burden. I felt like I wish there were better doctors than me there. I wish there was better people than me there. I wish there was someone that was more experienced than me there. But you just had to keep going. I just had to go through. I was like, look, I just have to not stop. And, some days I would work 18, 19 hours, 20-hour days, just trying to do what I could to help. But, in the end, it just feels like a drop in the ocean when you're there. So I'm getting all emotional, but
It
I didn't
it
want to get off
wasn't,
emotional.
but it wasn't for the people that you helped. For them it was everything. Right. I know it feels like a drop in the
Yeah,
ocean when you have this genocide
yeah,
against 2 million people and daily mass slaughter,
yeah.
but for the people that you helped, it wasn't nothing.
Yeah, I remember there was this one kid, Muscle he was called, and he'd fallen out of the third story of a building, because obviously people are living in partially bombed out buildings, and the wall collapsed and he fell out, and he was brought into hospital, and we had to put him in a medically induced coma, to help him. He had this huge swelling on his head. And I remember at the time, like, he had these broken ribs, and we were trying to intubate him. And at the same time, I was putting in a chest drain. So I was cutting through his chest. I was putting a tube through it to try and inflate his lungs to get him to breathe. He was having seizures. And, we only had 3 ventilators in the whole hospital. So we put him on a ventilator for a day. And then he had to be taken off the ventilator. And he's got this traumatic brain injury. He's got broken ribs. He's got a broken arm, and we had to take him off the ventilator because more injured people were coming that needed the ventilator. And I remember I would go visit him every day on the wards, and um, uh, I would, like, help him try and talk, and would help feed him. And I remember he was just sat there and he couldn't talk, and he was just, he was so, like, blurry eyed. He couldn't walk. He was still having, like, this. What we call, like, neural irritation, and he was just constantly shaking, and he couldn't talk, couldn't walk, was still soiling himself. And I remember about 8 days afterwards, I got a call, and this was during Eid. So it was after Ramadan, it was during Eid. And, I stayed
Hmm.
in touch with his mum, and I was always trying to support her. And I got a call from his mum. And I picked up, and I thought it was going to be his mum that spoke, and it was him. And he said, Eid
Oh,
Mubarak, ya doctor. And it was the first time he
oh,
spoke. And,
oh.
his mum sends me updates on him, and, he's learning how to walk again, and he's learning how to talk again. And it's one of those, like, things where you just think to yourself, like, we were just so persistent in whatever little we could to get him to recover. And I think about him a lot. I think about, like, how he's just living in a war zone with this traumatic brain injury, like so many children are in Gaza, that have had buildings collapsing on them, that have been shot in the head but survived, that have had explosive injuries and had small bits of shrapnel that have gone in the brain. There was so many of them that we've seen. So there's so many of these kids with these acquired brain injuries that are just there in Gaza, disabled essentially, and
I
they
think
might be able
too,
to.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was just going to say, I think too about the ones, even the ones that have been extremely lucky and
Yeah,
escaped any severe injury.
yeah,
What is this trauma going to do to them? I mean, what they've
yeah,
seen, what they've lived through. I mean, a grown adult who can contextualize things can't bear this level of
yeah,
pain and
yeah,
terror, day and loss, day after
yeah,
day after day. And
yeah,
it's part of why, like, thinking about your dad's story and your mom's story and your story and all this extraordinary human possibility that
yeah,
is just being destroyed in real time
yeah.
as the world watches.
Yeah, yeah. It was something like, I read a statistic, something like, I think 40 to 60% of the children in Gaza before the war had some form of PTSD before the war.
Yeah.
right? And that's why when people say, "Oh, it started on October the 7th," I'm just like, you don't have 60% of the children with PTSD before October the 7th if nothing was going on. You don't have 40% of the children in Gaza before the war having some form of malnutrition. 40% before the war.
Wow.
So when they talk about starvation being used as a weapon of war, starvation was being used as a weapon of life for Gaza before the war, was used as a weapon for their existence. The calories were
Yep.
counted that used to go into
Yep.
Gaza.
Yep.
And, like, despite that, you go in to Gaza and these people are so kind, so generous, so forgiving, so loving. And that's what I mean, when you were saying about, before we went on air, about how Palestine and Gaza will free the whole world.
Yeah.
And it's their humanity that shines through. And, I spoke about this with Hassan, because sometimes when like you have something like this, you try and contextualize it. Like, what does this mean on a spiritual place, from a religious point of view? How can you justify or quantify this level of slaughter of children, this level of trauma? And I always think back to Moses' story, the story of Moses and Pharaoh. Moses had led the people of Israel, Jewish people, he led them away from Pharaoh. Pharaoh, this dictator who was enslaving them, who would kill their firstborn children as a matter of policy, like what we're seeing in Gaza, right? And what happened was Moses led his people and he went to the Red Sea and he parted the seas and he managed to get his people freedom. And that's what's happening, what we see in Gaza. You see, Gaza is this defenseless civilian population. And then you have Pharaoh Netanyahu, who's killing their children, and a genocidal army surrounding them. And they're surrounded by an army on one side and the sea at the other side. But it's not the staff of Moses that's parting the sea. What they have done, the staff and what they have parted, is they have parted the darkness in this world. They have opened the eyes and the hearts of the whole world to what's going on, to the myth of liberal democracies, to the myth of Western supremacy. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
they've done. Their staff, that Moses' staff, that the Palestinian people have done, is they've parted not just the seas, they've parted the hatred in people's hearts. It's brought communities together that would never come together. You're seeing like sheikhs and imams marching with drag queens, and they're coming together over this humanity. People are beginning to let go. You're having Jewish people marching with Muslim people. You're
Mm-hmm.
having the black community and the indigenous community come out together to support it. You're having students who don't speak Arabic, who aren't Muslim, who are giving up 3, 4 years of being at somewhere like Harvard or Yale or Columbia, and getting expelled, suspended, maybe even going to jail. For what? For supporting these black and brown kids in Gaza that they don't share the same language with, they don't share the same religion with. And that's what the staff has done. The staff has already parted the seas. It's parted that myth, that fog. And no matter what they do, this genocidal army on the other side, the people of Gaza have set the whole world free. They might not get their freedom, but they've set the whole world free. And that's the beauty of the people of Gaza, is the sacrifice that they have made has opened up the eyes and ears to the whole world. And that's the way that I look at it, and I just go like, it's the way that these stories, they always rhyme. They're never the same, but they rhyme, and that's what we're seeing
Mm-hmm.
right now in Gaza.
I think that's an extraordinary way to put it. And yeah, I've just been thinking of it from a secular perspective of like the best and the worst of humanity all on display all at once.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
worst barbarisms and horrors that, I think some of us deluded ourselves could be put in the past, playing out
Yeah,
on our timelines every day with no one with
yeah,
the power to stopping
yeah,
it, and many with the power actually supporting it, enabling it.
yeah,
And then you see this also on the other side, extraordinary outpouring of humanity, that represents
yeah,
sort of the best of the human spirit. And,
yeah,
you being a part of that tradition for sure. What time, which you went to Gaza twice post October
yeah,
7th, what
yeah.
was the time period when you were there? What was going on sort of like politically?